There is a specific terrifying sound that accompanies the shattering of an illusion. It isn't a loud crash or a dramatic explosion. It's quiet. It's the soft crackle of a dying campfire, the clinking of half-empty wine glasses, and the burst of cruel, unapologetic laughter from a man you thought you were falling in love with. We are often told that the past is just a prologue, that teenagers do stupid things, and that time smooths out our rough edges. But sometimes, a story from the past doesn't just reveal who a person was, it exposes exactly who they still are. I learned this the hard way, sitting in the damp grass of the French countryside, realizing I was sharing a blanket with a monster disguised as a gentleman. It was mid-autumn, and the air in the Luberon Valley carried the sharp, earthen scent of crushed pine needles and wood smoke. I had been dating Corentin for exactly 7 weeks. To say things were promising would be an injustice to his charm. Corentin was 28, impeccably educated, possessed a dry, devastating wit, and looked like he belonged on the cover of a vintage tailoring magazine. When he invited me to his family's rustic stone estate for a long weekend to celebrate his 29th birthday, I packed my bags with a fluttering stomach. The guest list was intimate. Corentin, myself, his widower father Patris, and 2 of Corentin's oldest childhood friends, Vianney and Like. Friday evening was a dream. We sat on the flagstone terrace under a canopy of rusted ivy, eating roasted lamb and drinking a robust Syrah. Patris, a silver-haired academic with warm, crinkling eyes, went out of his way to make me feel welcome. He was a deeply gentle man, asking thoughtful questions about my career in architectural restoration, his voice a low, soothing rumble. Watching Corentin interact with his father, I felt a deep, anchoring sense of security. I thought I had found someone truly good. Saturday bled into a golden, lazy afternoon. Neighbors arrived, bringing baskets of figs and crusty bread. As twilight deepened into a bruised purple, the temperature dropped, and we gravitated toward a fire pit at the edge of the sprawling lawn. The older guests retired indoors, leaving a circle of about 8 of us huddled around the flames. Corentin, Vianney, and Like had been drinking steadily since noon. Their cheeks were flushed, their ties loosened, their voices rising in volume as they traded nostalgic anecdotes. At first, the stories were harmless. Broken bicycles, stolen cigarettes, the universal indignities of growing up. But as the fire burned down to glowing orange embers, the tone shifted. Vianney, leaning back on his elbows with a sloppy grin, brought up a name. Celestin. Corentin let out a sharp, braying laugh, slapping his knee. Like groaned, shaking his head with a smirk. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around my shoulders, waiting for the punchline. Celestin, they explained, was a boy in their secondary school. He was painfully introverted, socially awkward, and entirely isolated. They described him with a casual cruelty that made the wine sour in my stomach, mocking his stutter, his frayed clothes, his desperate desire to just be invisible. But simply bullying Celestin in the hallways wasn't enough to entertain Corentin and his friends. They needed a project. We created a fake MSN Messenger profile, Corentin said, his eyes glittering in the firelight. Stole a bunch of photos of Like's older cousin, called ourselves Orally. And we messaged him. They didn't just prank this boy for a weekend. They kept it up for 6 agonizing months. Every night after school, Corentin, Vianney, and Like would log on, taking turns playing the role of a girl who had secretly fallen in love with the school outcast. They fed him compliments, extracted his deepest insecurities, and spun a web of fictional romance. Celestin, starved for an ounce of human affection, fell for it entirely. He sent long, earnest paragraphs of poetry. He confessed his struggles. He bared his soul to a glowing screen while 3 boys sat in a basement across town, laughing until they couldn't breathe. The cruelty of it felt heavy, suffocating. I glanced around the circle. A few of the neighbors looked uneasy, shifting their gaze to the grass, but no one stopped them. The best part, Vianney chimed in, slurring slightly, was the grand finale. We told him Orally was finally coming to town. We arranged a meeting at a bus station 3 towns over. Corentin picked up the thread, his voice dripping with amusement. We gave him incredibly specific instructions. We told him to wear this hideous bright yellow casimere shirt he owned, so she could spot him in the crowd. We knew he had it because he wore it to school once and got destroyed for it. Celestin took the bait. He took a 2-hour bus ride on a miserable, rainy Saturday. He stood at the depot in his fluorescent yellow cartoon shirt, waiting for a girl who did not exist. How long did he wait? I asked. My voice sounded thin, brittle. Corentin shrugged, taking a long pull from his beer. No idea, we weren't there, but he didn't show up to school on Monday, or Tuesday. When he finally came back, we printed out the love letters he wrote to Aurelie and taped them to the cafeteria doors. Celestin vanished from the school a week later. Transferred out completely broken. I waited for the caveat. I waited for Corentin's face to fall for him to say, "It was the most shameful thing I've ever done. I hate the boy I was back then." Instead, chuckled. "Honestly," Corentin sighed, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye, "the only regret I have is that we weren't evil enough to ask him for inappropriate photos." Imagine the blackmail materials. A thick, suffocating silence descended on my end of the bench. I felt a cold sweat prickle at my hairline. I turned my head slowly and saw Petrus standing just outside the ring of firelight. He had come out to collect the empty wine bottles. He had heard the entire end of the story. The older man stood frozen, clutching a pair of green glass bottles, his face drained of all color. The look in his eyes wasn't just anger. It was a profound, devastating grief. He looked at his son as if a stranger had taken his place. Corentin, blind with alcohol and arrogance, never even noticed his father turning on his heel and retreating into the dark. I stood up, I didn't say a word. I just walked away from the fire, the grass dampening my shoes, the sound of their laughter chasing me all the way to the guest room. I didn't sleep a single second that night. I lay rigid beneath the heavy duvet, staring at the exposed wooden beams of the ceiling. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured a 14-year-old boy in a bright yellow shirt, standing in the rain at a bleak bus terminal, checking his flip phone, waiting for a miracle that was actually a firing squad. And then I pictured the man sleeping in the next room, a man who still found that image hilarious. At 4 in the morning, I heard Corentin stumble down the hall. I kept the door locked. By 5, the sky began to bleed into a pale, bruised gray. I rose in absolute silence. I packed my overnight bag, folding my clothes with meticulous mechanical precision. I didn't leave a note. I slipped out the heavy oak front door, the gravel crunching softly beneath my boots as I walked the 2 miles to the village train station. By 7:30, I was on a direct rail line back to Paris, watching the Provençal countryside blur past the condensation on the window. Sunday was Corentin's 29th birthday. The original itinerary dictated that I was to take him on a surprise, private lunch date before rejoining the group. Sitting in my quiet Paris apartment, holding a mug of black coffee, I pulled out my phone. I crafted the text message with the clinical detachment of a surgeon. "Happy birthday, my love. I woke up early to set up your surprise. I need you to meet me at the old abbey ruins near Gordes at noon. Follow the instructions perfectly. I promise it will be worth it." I had picked the ruins off a digital map. They were an hour's drive from his father's estate, isolated and difficult to reach. At 10 o'clock, my screen illuminated. Corentin's reply was instantaneous. "You are incredible. I'm leaving in an hour." "I can't wait." I set my phone on the kitchen counter and watched the digital clock. At 12:30, he texted that he had arrived at the ruins. He noted the weather was unusually cold. I typed my response slowly. "There's a slight delay with the caterer. I'm so sorry, babe. Head to L'Auberge des Pins. It's a restaurant about 30 minutes north of you. Wait for me there." He replied with a string of heart emojis. At 1:15, my phone buzzed again. He was seated at a table. He asked where I was. "I'm pulling up in 20 minutes, I wrote. "When you see me, you'll understand the wait. Go ahead and order the most expensive bottle of Chateauneuf du Pape on their menu. My treat." I sat at my dining table, listening to the muffled sounds of Parisian traffic below. I imagined him sitting there in his tailored jacket, swirling a glass of deep red wine, checking his watch. The minutes dragged. At 1:30 he called. I let it ring. He called again. I let it ring. 3 texts arrived in rapid succession, shifting from playful impatience to genuine worry. At exactly 2 o'clock, 45 minutes after he had opened that exorbitant bottle of wine, I picked up the phone and sent my final message. "So how does it feel to have people play with your feelings?" I didn't block him immediately. I wanted to see the read receipt. I wanted him to stare at those words, to feel the icy plummet in his stomach, the sudden, sharp humiliation of sitting alone in a crowded room, realizing you have been made a fool of. The influx of calls began seconds later. I muted the device, letting the screen flash silently in the dimming light of my apartment. An hour later, an unknown number appeared on the screen. I answered. It was Vianney. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he barked, his voice vibrating with rage. "Corentin is devastated. You completely ruined his birthday. He's sitting at a restaurant with a 400-euro bill and you just abandoned him. Are you insane?" I kept my voice dead level. "Consider it an extremely small payback for what you 3 did to Celestin. Tell Corentin to lose my number. I hung up, then I blocked them all. The immediate aftermath wasn't triumphant. There was no cinematic swell of music. I felt hollow, sickened by the proximity I had shared with such cruelty. Over the next few weeks, mutual acquaintances reached out. Most of them called me unhinged. They argued that it was deeply unfair to punish a grown man for the sins of his adolescence, that I was playing vigilante, that adults communicate their grievances rather than orchestrating elaborate petty traps. For a brief window, I questioned myself. Was I the villain? Was I holding a man hostage to a past he couldn't change? Then my phone rang. It was Petrus. He had called under the pretense of asking for a contact in my architectural firm, but the conversation quickly shifted. His voice sounded older, heavier than it had on that terrace. "I know what happened," Petrus said quietly. "I know why you left." I braced myself for the reprimand, for the fatherly defense of his son. It never came. "I didn't sleep that night," Petrus murmured, the gravel in his voice scraping against the silence. To hear them laughing, to see the joy they took in dismantling another human being. It broke something in me. He paused, letting out a long, ragged exhale. "I enjoyed meeting you. I am deeply sorry you are no longer in my son's life, but I understand, and I do not blame you." He didn't try to fix it. He didn't ask me to give Corentin another chance. He just offered the solemn solidarity of someone who had witnessed the same horrifying truth. Corentin attempted to contact me through burner numbers and email accounts for months. He offered apologies that sounded suspiciously like justifications. "We were just kids. It was a different time. You misunderstood the context." I never replied. I had seen the truth in the firelight. It wasn't the teenage mistake that condemned him. It was the 28-year-old man who still thought destroying a vulnerable child was the funniest story he had to tell. We are defined by the grace we extend to those who can do nothing for us. A man who finds joy in the humiliation of the defenseless will eventually find a reason to humiliate you. If you ever find yourself sitting across from someone who proudly wears their past cruelty as a badge of humor, do not wait for them to change. Walk away, leave them at the table, alone with the tab for exactly who they are. If you found value in this story, please subscribe and leave a comment below. Have you ever experienced a moment where a person's true colors were revealed in an instant? Share your experiences. Until next time, protect your peace and never settle for someone who lacks a heart.